Hey, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. Good, good, good. How are you?
Yeah, keeping well, thank you. Keeping well. I have been thinking a little bit about my early career and whether I had periods where I was sort of taken advantage of, or if I was just paying my dues or working through a sort of rites of passage when, like, doing the things that probably weren't in my job description and or maybe described as like going above and beyond, like those early career days where you kind of just like answer to anyone's like beck and call, and like I just don't ever remember the word no being entertained. And I just don't know, is that still a thing for people entering the market these days?
Interesting. So, exceeding your expectations. What does exceeding your expectations actually pay? Yeah, good one.
You know.
Let's chat.
So for me, when I entered the corporate world, it was, I don't know, there was a very clear ladder, social, in office hierarchy of of where you kind of were. And, you know, for the first few years, I was at the very bottom. And therefore, I was always just, you know, yeah, the beck and call of somebody else, or was told, you know, X and Y is happening. It would be great if you could be there. It was never really like mandatory, but it was never also an option. Or getting things done. This isn't really your job, but you're good and we'll know you'll deliver. Would you mind? But then that kind of would you mind prose was never an option. It was a statement. It was never a question. But I started work in a very physical environment. You know, I commuted 5 days a week. You know, that was the world. And I just wonder if that is the same now that fewer people commute daily or in the, you know, a workplace office, or if people are just like barraged by constant team calls of can you pick this up, or continuous Slack messages of like what's happening here, or we're having this, can you do this, it would be great for your help on this. And I just don't know if it's the same. Is it the same? And also, do people have the appetite or the inclination to do it anymore?
Good point. But something you mentioned is whether or not it's a rite of passage. I wonder if it is something that is mainly experienced by people who are all rounders. So, in those early parts of your career when you're still trying to figure things out, you're still learning, I think that's usually the natural time for people to just take on whatever is being asked of them, and they're not necessarily going to refer back to their job description each time a new task or project is put on their laps. But some of what you've mentioned are those, is you talk about this a lot, is the soft skills that you gain through work experience that you can't necessarily get from going on a course.
Mm.
So being asked to go to that work function, so the work company is putting on an event and it's at the weekend or it's in the evening, and being asked to go, or helping planning company events, or hosting guests and being there during the meetings. I mean, I was always, well, oftentimes I'd be asked to join, sometimes board level meetings, sometimes executive level meetings, and they wanted someone to do minutes. And there were times when I used to think, why am I actually doing this? But I actually
Mm.
learned so much being in those meetings and doing minutes. And then sometimes I'd actually get asked questions because of what my job is. I'd be asked to contribute to certain topics, and that helped me a lot later down the line when I wanted to get sponsorship or buy-in for new initiatives. So there was something to be gained from that exposure and that experience. But I can see how you do want to try and create some type of boundary or understanding and managing expectations from both sides, you as the employee and them as the employer. I do But I understand where you're coming from, though. You're reflecting on it and on degree being taken advantage of. Is that because you're thinking about what you were paid at the time?
Yeah, I think like the question is like when you go above and beyond and you do the things that aren't in your job description or within sort of your brief of work. There's no title change. There's no pay rise.
Okay, okay.
So there's no sort of like tangible benefit. But actually, was it a waste of time? And for me, in hindsight, I don't think it was. Like, I think at the time, I was always like, oh, always doing this or having to do other things. Or like when I started getting invited to go into like client lunches and evening like drink receptions and stuff, I would be like, great, it's a free lunch, it's a free dinner, it's some drinks after work, it's no biggie. I'd probably have, I would have had to eat lunch. I would have probably ended up going for drinks after work anyway. And yes, there was upside to it. They were all free. But then at the time, I always recall it's like, that's my evening or that's my lunch break. Like that's my time. I didn't get it back. I didn't get like a late start. I was expected
Absolutely
to be
not.
back in the office like 9 a.m. the next morning, if not earlier. And I don't know, at the time you kind of feel robbed. You're like, oh, I'm putting all of this stuff in, this time and energy and effort. And yeah, like some of like the evening things were good. Like if you had like a good bunch of juniors there, like you'd have a good time and everyone would rock down to Weatherspoons afterwards because it was the only place that we could afford to drink in. But in hindsight, like you mentioned, I got to understand how to talk to people in a professional environment, what to sort of expect when meeting people that are far more senior than you. I don't know if it's really a skill, but like I got to learn how to drink and handle my drink in a professional environment. I'm not quite sure I can put that on my CV or ever did, but it did help. It helped me gain FaceTime with people, connect with people from other firms, allowed me to essentially build my network of within an industry. And I think sort of, outside of those types of things where I was meeting people or it was a lunch or whatever, all of the other stuff, like you said, at the time of your early career, I was a sponge. Like I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really have much direction. So when people would offer me things that were a learning opportunity, I would take them. But again, at the same time, at that time, it was probably more of like, I just want to keep busy, like I want stuff to do. But in hindsight, it's like, actually, those are quite pinnacle moments of your learning what's going on around you, how processes work, why decisions were made. And yeah, it wasn't the job, but like you begin to build a repertoire of skills and interests, and you kind of know what you do and don't like, what you are good at, what you're not so good at. So I don't think it was a waste of time, but I get the impression that younger generations might sort of see it as a waste of time or might not see the non-material upside, because I think everyone wants something in return for their actions. But that might just be a bit of a hunch. I don't really know.
Yeah. There's something you said about at the time, your feelings about it at the time. I must say for me, I was so oblivious. I just loved the opportunity of being involved in something different. I remember when I was in one startup, I used to get involved in every department, whatever they needed help with, I'd just go and help them. And doing that so early on exposed me to different ways of operating in the singular company for the same goal, the same ultimate goal, which is to get the product to the customer and for the customer to be happy with the product that they are purchasing. And I still use that experience today, because doing what I do, being in InfoSec, being in privacy, we have to look at all of the business processes across every department and analyze risks and make suggestions for improvements and take all of that to put that in a nice package for auditors to understand and to review. And I think those early experiences helped me to do that. The other thing, to your point about attending client dinners or client entertainment functions, whatever it was, talking to customers about how they use the product and understanding I know this is in some ways probably a little bit unique to software, but any business that is a product or service offering, you want to understand your customers, right? And for me, that helps so much from the perspective of internally when you're trying to get sponsorship and buy-in for a new initiative. You have to somehow be able to tie it to customers' needs and customer satisfaction. I know that's really difficult for us that work within the security field. So one of the things that I quickly learned was if I could just translate all of this security and privacy language into something that customers understand and customers expect, then it's a lot easier for me to get into those meetings and have FaceTime with the decision makers and hopefully eventually get their approval. I wouldn't have really had that exposure or understanding if I didn't get involved in so many things that I did earlier on. But yeah, like I said, I was so oblivious to the idea that, they just, and there's that, today I'd probably say it's not so genuine, but the attempts at flattery when they'd say things like, oh, you're actually so good at such and such. Would you mind helping so-and-so with this other thing that's got nothing to do with you? Or I used to just always say yes, even though, like I said, I was oblivious to the fact that they were trying to just squeeze as much productivity out of me as they could. But I was always aware of the false attempts at flattery. It's like, I know that you don't genuinely believe that, but I am seeing something that I can get out of this. And so I'm going to go ahead and do this. That was how my tunnel vision was. I'm getting loads of more experience. I'm being able to, especially because the person who's introducing me to this other team or this other individual is usually someone who's senior. So that in itself, you've now introduced me to a person in department that I wouldn't have ordinarily spoken to or worked with, unless it's coming to the point of internally auditing or preparing them for an external audit, which is not always the best time to meet someone for the first time. So having that FaceTime with those other individuals, there was benefit to me, and I just had tunnel vision. I said exposure, experience. I'm going to get it however way I can. But today, a lot different. But now we're talking about over 10 years in this industry. I am a lot more aware and a lot more selective in the things that I allow myself to be going above and beyond for. And the other thing I think about is, do we ever really just stick to our job description? Unless you're in something like that has clear outputs, like what comes to mind is maybe construction or manufacturing. Maybe there's very, very clear job descriptions and responsibilities. I also think about maybe things around supply chain. For those types of fulfillment roles, maybe you'd be quite fixed in your responsibilities. I think even from a training perspective, they have to be quite limited in what they allow you to do. Like if you don't have specific certifications or training, you can't do certain roles. I think in those types of regulated spaces, maybe there'd be less opportunity for you to be forced to do something or encouraged, right? Without option.
Yeah, it was always encouraged. You were always encouraged, but there was never a way of saying no, or no was never an option. Like it's always I think that's the one thing I resonate really with what you said there about like the flattery element of, things like, oh, you're a victim of your own success because everyone knows you're good and they want to work with you and they know that you're going to deliver. And it's sort of like, okay, cool, but how does that then transfer into something tangible for me? Because when it then came to like pay rise review every year, you just get the same response of like, the firm is doing a flat whatever percentage, never a pay review, or never a pay rise that met the kind of output. There was no title change, and that largely because I started my career in a very sort of stringent and big policy, lack of room for manoeuvre environment. And the corporate world I kind of get to a certain degree. But I think that then feeds into why people hate, not hate, maybe hate's a strong word, people resent doing anything other than what they're paid to do. Because actually, there is a period, I think, in your early career where you should be a sponge and you should be open to doing and trying new things. When you start to get into like a little bit more of, your established career, I think that's probably less of the case. But ultimately, the more people are asked to do outside of their remit, I think becomes a point of resentment for them, because actually they're not rewarded in any shape or form for what they're doing. They're just doing extra work for free or picking up the slack for somebody else, which I don't think is particularly fair.
Yes, recognition and reward. You've just reminded me of something. I was once told by a business owner, who shall remain nameless, that they knew amongst their workforce, in observing their workforce, they knew who just wanted recognition. So whether that's just a title change or some type of public acknowledgement in a company meeting, or an all-hands meeting, versus who's the person that cares more about the financial reward. So this person is only going to do something if there's an additional pay associated with it. And they told me that they definitely did both. And so if you were the person who seemed to, for whatever reason, just care about recognition, that was all you're going to get. And the one who only cared about reward, if it was something that the business really needed, then they'd always give that person the financial reward for the additional work that they're being asked to do. And it stuck in my head that there's always going to be a psychological element to managing people, and the idea of being psychoanalyzed by the people that are paying you, and that determining what they see as value add and how you should be rewarded or recognized for that is something that I've kept in mind, and I think it would be advantageous for people to keep in mind as well. Something I want to pose: if you are perhaps not always applying for a job, sometimes it's just referrals, right? But if you see a job description and all of the items in that job description you're able to do, and you only did those things, does it actually prepare you for the next level up of that particular role, do you think?
I don't think so, because I think as part of to develop or to progress, you have to take some opportunity to invest in yourself or your career, I think. I mean, I think is it a case of or Richard Branson's ethos is train them well enough to leave, but treat them well enough that they don't want to leave. And I think what happens in most businesses is that, you're given a job description, you do your job, but then when it comes to the review point, it's like you've done your job, but you haven't done anything else. But also the company haven't either encouraged or treated you well enough that you want to do anything else for them. But then it does, like if you're at the early stages of your career, to be able to go and apply for another job or to apply for the next bump up somewhere else, you have to demonstrate that you've done more than what your job description is, or you've got to, demonstrate that you're able to take on, management or leadership. And that ultimately is quite hard, because if you're starting out in something or you are, you're new, you might not necessarily have the exposure to leadership and management, but you have to be able to demonstrate that through something, and that might be, a project that isn't particularly in your day-to-day remit. On the flip side of that, I don't feel there is too much of an issue for those people that do just want to do their job. Like if you want to just do your job, you get paid and go home, and you're happy with your lot, that's great. Like ultimately you're doing the things that you say you are going to do, or you're asked to do in sort of an employer-employee relationship. Because not everyone necessarily does want the next level up in responsibility. But what I do think becomes the trap is that businesses don't value the people that do do the same thing or do things, a handful of things or one thing particularly well for them on repeat. Maybe that is changing in the world of sort of AI and automation. But I think in order to be able to push forward, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've done and can do things that are outside of your direct job description. And then let's face it, in reality, most job descriptions only really list like a third of the things that they actually want you to do. Because by the time you have looked at a job advert and the description attached, arguably this doesn't apply to like corporate jobs where like they have a pack, they have a job description pack that is like 33 pages long, and it's like their appraisal process and their review process, and these are the types of things. But like I think back of all the job descriptions that I've had, they're all really quite loose, and most of them have got that lovely little caveat of like an additional duties that the company requires as and when on an ad hoc basis, because there's nothing like we want you to do loads of stuff for us without paying you than a lovely kind of get out clause of there's so many other things that we can't be bothered to list in this job description, so we're just going to put this lovely little one-liner in, and that will cover us for the shit that we're about to ask you to do. And I genuinely do think that there's a bit of give and take on both sides. Like employers have got to be a bit more flexible. They have to be comfortable with people saying no to them, and it's actually not an employee's responsibility to make things work for an employer. That's a leadership, that's up to leadership. But yeah, I also think there is a bit of an expectation that people should be doing a bit more than just the basics. I always remember like when I started working, I moved to a different law firm, and some of the juniors, like, they never went out to the socials, and they always used that they were billing as an excuse not to go. So like making money for the firm, arguably, but it never seemed to wash because the partners who were essentially mandating people that go to the pub together, they had gone through this period of life. Their junior days were spent by going to the pub when they were told to. So like that kind of, and that's not like going above and beyond an expectation of like you're delivering loads for the company. That was about giving up your free time to go and have your face seen. And obviously in that world, that's super important. And I'd be super interested to know what it's like now, because obviously it's even more competitive. It's displaced and remote, but also still quite a lot of in-person working. So I think people should be prepared, if I'm honest, to do something or some stuff, but not to the detriment where it's burning you out and it's making you resentful.
Yeah. One of the little cheat sheets that I was given was when it becomes a repeated thing and it's in the same type of job area, try and use, if progression is something that you care about, if things like getting some form of recognition is important to you, if you know that and you've been told reward is off the table, something that you should try and think about is how you can prepare yourself for being asked things in your next role with another company. So things like being able to get a new certification or some type of CPD associated with the extra work that you're being asked to do. And what's really important as well is try and keep a work diary. And I don't mean going through, dear diary, this is how my day went. I mean more so jotting down notes of the things that you've done, because those things you just don't realize how much you've done until you're in a conversation with a new company and then they're talking to you about projects and then you remember all the different things you've been involved in. So if you have those bullet points to hand, that's really helpful. And that's one of the ways that you can try and get something out of it is it may not be recognized in the company that you're in, but there will be other companies that do recognize and will reward you for that additional experience. And something you said about how you felt. I keep going back to that because it just brings things back to mind about burnout and how I didn't at the time have words for things like that, and I just knew that I was always really really tired, but you kept pushing on, and so I'd say is to think about some of those risks and maybe if you could set some boundaries are that have your well-being in mind and as a priority actually. But there's so much that you can gain from taking on a lot more. But yes, be mindful of how exploited you may be being by taking on all these additional responsibilities without the additional reward. But yeah, I think sticking to your job description, it helps in some roles, in some industries. But for the most part, if you're trying to grow, growth happens outside of the comfort zone, right? Sometimes people stick with what they know because that's where they're comfortable. That's also something. But yeah, like you said, if you want to stick with your job description, stick with it. But if you want to go outside of the bounds of your description, make sure that there's something that you're also getting out of it. So it's a two-way street, right?
Yeah, I definitely think it is, and I think people need to think about it more than just the tangible benefit in terms of like title and pay. I wonder if the world has changed now that workforces are displaced and remote and people are not. I remember like a lot of my early stuff of being asked by other people was because we were all in a confined space, and it was very easy to be able to expose.
Swivel on the chair.
Quite literally tap on the shoulder or, like, are you free or can I borrow 2 minutes of your time? And actually whether now we have forced our hand in other directions because we're not together as much. And I'd be super interested, if any, sort of entry level workers are out there, how are you going above and beyond in a remote environment? Because, if you really wanted to, you could tee up all of your your messages to be delayed sent on Slack to like 11 o'clock, but you finish at 5, so it looks like you're working really late, but are you actually? Whereas, when we worked together, there was a
sneaky
clear expectation or, a very approved view of, if you were in the office past 7 o'clock, like that was a good thing. And most of us, I'll hold my hands up, quite a lot of that time I wasn't going above and beyond. I was actually just catching up on the stuff from the day because the whirlwind of everything happening and lots of people being around and general office distraction just meant I didn't get a great deal done.
Everything done, yeah.
In those, work hours, and the 3 or 4 hours that I would have in the evening in the office when most people had gone were the hours that I actually did my work. And that kind of arguably is, a lot of big resistance to why a lot of people don't want to go back into the office, right? It's because it's not more productive. It's just that you're all in the same place, I think.
Yeah. Something to think about. That's a very good point. And yeah, I think exceeding your expectations, what does it pay? What's the answer? Just depends, eh?
Yeah, I think it pays in a way that you can't quantify. I think I think it pays in a way that it provides you with skills that you're not going to get at some CPD approved certificate online or some tick boxing exercise. I think it provides you with experience and exposure that arguably is beneficial, and you will take with you either to your next role or hold for life. So I would say it does pay in its own way.
Yeah, agreed.